Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, something I think we're all noticing wherever you live in the world is a push towards cashless environments and contactless convenience everywhere in our everyday life. But what does this mean for the future of cash and cashless for everyday users and equally for businesses? So today, I want to explore the pros and cons of a cashless environment, how going cashless will, yes, create ease and efficiency, but how that will also require a vast change in infrastructure, which could pose as a significant barrier for many countries. And I also want to talk about the impacts on vulnerable people who are unbanked and explore the real price of financial exclusion and how we can change that with technology. So today I've invited Sanat Rao onto the podcast to join me today. He's a digital anthropologist, an AI ethicist, and CEO of Infosys Finacle. What I'm trying to say here is he is perfectly positioned to share his insights and expertise on this topic. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to the UK, where you can join me and Sanat in conversation right now. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure, Neil. And thanks for having me on your show. And a big hi to everyone who's listening. So I'm here based in the UK, just like you. And I run a global software platform that I will shortly talk to you about. Well, from a career point of view, I've been in financial services and technology for over 3 decades. I started my career as a banker with Australia's ANZ Bank. And prior to my present role, I was a senior partner with IBM Consulting here in the UK. I'm presently the head of Infosys Finacle, which is a subsidiary of the well-known global IT company Infosys Technologies that hopefully many of the listeners would have heard about. This is actually my second stint at Infosys, Neil, and I was with them prior to my role at IBM. So I've been very fortunate over the course of these last 3 decades to have worked with, 3 very well-respected names in the banking and technology industries. And amongst other things, I'm particularly grateful for the opportunities and the exposure that these 3 organizations have given me, not least the opportunity to, travel to and meet people in over 75 countries globally. So that's something I'm very, very passionate about. You could say that whatever I've said about my journey so far is fairly sort of conventional and orthodox. But in the last few years, I have, focused on getting a slightly unconventional and a less orthodox dimension to my profile. So just a few years ago, I got back to academia after a gap of 28 years, mind you. I never thought I'd do that, but well, who knows? So I did that. And, the aim was really to develop, I think, new interests, broaden my skills. And a lot of people will talk about, wanting to remain relevant in the dynamic age that we live in. So I now hold a master's in an emerging social science called digital anthropology. And given the digital age that we are working in, and given the continued relevance of people, even as we expect that people will get replaced with automation and what have you, digital anthropology gave me a very close perspective of the issues in the digital age and who we are as people. So I was very fortunate to do that course at the University College London. And thereafter, I was very fortunate to be selected as part of the very first and exclusive group at the University of Cambridge, where I'm presently pursuing an MPhil program on the ethics of artificial intelligence. So I'm interested in aspects of our life and business that lie at the intersection of digital anthropology and the ethics of artificial intelligence. And a lot of my time today, actually, even in my conversations with clients in different parts of the world, there are different elements of this which touch one or more aspect of what they're doing in their day-to-day work. So, technology is not all only about technology. I think people still remain very, very relevant to all the changes that are happening there. So that's me, Neil.
Wow, what an incredible journey you've been on there. And I completely agree with you. And one of the themes of this podcast is technology works best when it brings people together. And there's so many reasons I'm excited to get you back on the podcast today. And I did speak with John Dangoya on here about, I think it was 2 years ago. But for anyone that did miss that conversation, can you just offer a quick overview of what Finacle is and the kind of problems you're solving with technology?
Sure. So Finacle is industry leader in digital banking solutions. Our genesis was in traditional core banking, but as we know, core banking itself has changed in dimension considerably over the years. Today, our solutions help more than 1 billion people and millions of businesses across the world, across the 6 continents that we operate in. And we help them to save, pay, borrow, and invest better. So banks in over 100 countries of varying sizes, rely on Finacle to scale their digital transformation. And this obviously, as we know, comes in different avatars, if you like. So we are not a one size fits all kind of a shop. And our solutions address not just traditional core banking, but also we have solutions in lending, digital engagement, payments, cash management, and liquidity management, which, has been a big boost for us in the last couple of years, particularly. We offer solutions like wealth management and treasury, but not on a global basis. Those are a little more niche in certain traditional markets in Asia Pacific and Middle East Africa. And more recently, delving into deeper, analytics and AI and blockchain requirements. So we are a business that's cut across, multiple lines of business and multiple solutions. But I must point out for the benefit of your listeners that our focus and our strategy really has been completely based on organic growth. So unlike many of our competitors, in fact, most of our competitors who have a very aggressive inorganic growth strategy as well, we as an organization have preferred to focus on organic growth. And we think that in the parts where we've chosen to play, we do a pretty good job there.
Fantastic. And of course, there is a great deal of talk about cashless environments at the moment. And I think, especially since the pandemic, in our leisure activities, everything's all about contactless convenience, and we're very often capable of leaving our wallet at home and paying everything on our card or from our phone. But I'm always conscious of how those impacts, or how those trends impact a business. So can you share your insights on the pros and cons of those cashless environments from a business perspective, rather than just how we take that kind of technology for granted when we're out and about?
Sure. And I just want to touch on something that you just mentioned. I mean, I don't carry cash anymore. Everything is on the phone. And we are fortunate here in the UK where pretty much most transactions can get done electronically and with our phone. So, I mean, even our travel cards, Oyster cards, obviously we don't use that. Everything is done on the phone. So I think that's been a big benefit. Having said that, while we are predominantly digital and cashless, I'm not sure that today we are ready for an environment where there's absolutely no cash. Yeah. There are certainly several sections of society today who are not digitally native and don't have access to infrastructure that enables them to be completely digital. So we do need to be mindful that, those are important sections of society. I don't know, Neil, whether you noticed that recently in the media, there was a report that the Irish bank, AIB, had to reverse its decision to make 70 branches cashless.
No.
And it was done entirely due to customer and public unease. That's right. So they wanted to make 70 branches cashless, and it was in the face of pressure from customers and the public that they had to sort of reverse that decision. So I think even banks are mindful that as everyone is heading in a direction of more digital and less cash, I think we're still some distance away from being completely cashless. That said, I think the trends, when you look in the market, are very much pointing towards a desire of the ecosystem to sort of move in that direction. And certainly there are some economies that are more ready for being cashless than others. I think somewhere, in Western Europe, for example, we are probably down to being, I guess, somewhere between 80 to 85% cashless. And certainly even in Europe, there are markets like the Nordics, for example, where I'd say that is probably, 90 to 95% cashless. So it's a very, very small segment of the market that still uses cash in the Nordics. If you look at two large economies where this kind of a change has manifested itself at a fairly rapid pace, China and India. So at the turn of the century in China, it was predominantly cash, but with the proliferation of technology and particularly digital wallets, that situation there has changed completely. And last year, if I'm not wrong, China did something like over $70 trillion of payments through mobile wallets alone, which, if I'm not wrong, is probably almost twice that of all plastic transactions, globally. I was in India recently, and I was astonished at the huge progress the country has made leveraging the QR code-based payments infrastructure. And QR codes, as we know, is today becoming very relevant in many different transactions. And India as a country has used that as a mechanism through its UPI payment infrastructure. So, you can go to a a vendor selling vegetables at a cart on a street corner. And if you buy vegetables worth 100 rupees, which is a little more than $1.5 US dollars, you can pay for that by your mobile phone. The important thing to recognize is not that you can actually pay it, but the fact that a vegetable seller who belongs to a segment of society which traditionally would have wanted cash, they are quite happy to accept the cash on their mobile phones and for a phone-to-phone transaction to be completed in a matter of seconds. So I think this talks a lot about the changes that are happening, and I think that's fantastic for the economy, and certainly it's fantastic for the people all around. Specifically, in terms of your question about the pros and cons, I think the benefits of going cashless, certainly there are multiple benefits. Managing a cash economy is expensive in the first instance, and in addition to the fact that a cashless economy can bring down the cost of printing, the cost of storage, the cost of circulation of cash, all the security infrastructure that needs to be built around the movement of cash between branches, ATMs, and so on. So all of that will get reduced, if not eventually. And there's also then the element of the fact that, money laundering, fraudulent transactions, a lot of the cross-border transactions will get simplified. So all of this, of course, can get facilitated with a cashless economy. So I think there are benefits that all can see, though, like I said earlier, we need to be mindful that there are sections of society that may not be as yet ready to accept that. I think in terms of the disadvantages, if you like, given that most of us have been brought up in a predominantly cash-centric society, and certainly I grew up, my early years were in India where it was completely a cash-based economy. Cash brings a certain degree of trust that is hard to replicate with the digital payments. And we do need to acknowledge that even as the digital infrastructure gets more and more mature. Having said that, there's obviously sufficient security that exists today to ensure that transactions are safe and that security is not compromised. So while the benefits of payments innovation might be clear, I do believe that there are societal costs of going cashless, being economically disadvantaged populations or relying on, belonging to one of those segments that often rely on cash. This acceleration towards digital will threaten in further marginalizing some of those sections. So I think we need to be a little conscious about that. But I'm confident that with the steps that economies, central governments, the banking industry are taking, alongside a variety of other infrastructure-related measures, that we are heading in the right direction, but probably still some distance away from being completely cashless.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And not just the branch closures that we've both been seeing as well, but there's also an increase in the removal of ATM machines. I think we often forget that there is actually, I think, something like 1.2 million people in the UK that don't have access to a bank account. And I think there's 1 billion people in the world that are unbanked. So there's a lot of work to do there. And I know there are tech solutions that are aimed at solving that problem. But I'm curious, for the way forward, how should businesses be preparing for this future, which almost seems inevitable? And will it require an expensive, vast change in infrastructure? Because that's where things start to get pretty serious for businesses, isn't it? When that kind of investment that's needed to change that infrastructure.
Sure. Just before I answer that question, this point about reduction of ATMs, I think we're going to see not just a reduction, but, historically, banks used to have ATMs as standalone points of, cash dispensation or just outside their branches. I think what we're going to see is ATMs moving into areas where people like you and I go more regularly, whether it's petrol pumps, shopping malls. So you're there for some other work and you also use the ATM to draw cash. Yeah. I think the days of just having standalone ATMs outside a branch are certainly limited. Coming back to your question, I think first we have to understand that the payment infrastructure itself exists within a larger ecosystem in the country, and a country that is on the path to high levels of automation and high levels of digitization can certainly help facilitate that. And, you mentioned a few minutes ago about COVID, and certainly I think in the last 2 years, all of us have been, I think, pleasantly surprised in the way the infrastructure and indeed all the people have sort of helped transition to this new way of working. To be competitive on multiple fronts, I think the governments and economies need to be smart about the way that they're building this infrastructure. Now, one of the benefits of having less cash circulating in the economy is that, you cut down on fraudulent transactions and tax avoidance. And I think, the governments need to be building an environment where probably taxation is in a real-time format, tightening money laundering techniques and so on. And I think these are adjacent changes that we'll find even as we talk about being prepared for a cashless economy. And as the pandemic has shown us, accessing services that are increasingly digital is going to require, digital money, possibly in the form of CBDCs, which many countries, including here in the UK, the regulators have been talking about. I know crypto is a word that evokes mixed reactions today, but I do believe that, there will be some role for crypto as time progresses. Tokens, I think, will be more prominent. And certainly, digital identity as a concept, will become more prevalent. And all of this will reside within the larger infrastructure, within which the payment infrastructure has to sort of coexist. So I think, governments are conscious about this, and certainly steps are being made to move in that direction. Firms that are already within the payment ecosystem can look at, I think, several approaches, and clearly there's no one-size-fits-all approach. I'd point to maybe a couple of them. First is to, invest in integrated payment solutions to help meet merchants, digital first needs. And I mentioned a moment ago about ATMs, moving towards points of sale and shopping malls and petrol pumps and so on. I think merchant acquirers and incumbent banks should look at, capitalizing on an opportunity to upgrade from, legacy systems, standalone systems towards integrated point of sale solutions. This may also require the firms to partner or build, vertical specific software, which extends the supply, if you like, of the whole process. So, whether it's ordering and business management, the ability to acquire new merchants. So I think all of these are areas where we'll see more focus. I think there'll also be an expansion to adjacent areas to provide better money management capabilities. And as we, mentioned a few moments ago, there is a cost to, moving and handling cash. So I think money management capabilities, will certainly receive a lot of attention. And last but not the least, I'd point to the fact that there will be a exploration for the viability of new payment flows. We are already in a digital payment era, and new payment flows are being ushered in. And with all the talk that's going around regarding digital currencies, Bitcoin and crypto and so on, I think you'll find that new payment flows will emerge, and these will need to coexist, and in some cases even replace some of the existing flows that are there in the economy. So I think this will require traditional payment companies and banks to look very carefully, not just at what the proposition is, but also to look at addressing any technology gaps that may exist. Because mind you, a lot of this technology infrastructure was set up at a completely different period of time, when the expectations, when the compulsions, when the interdependencies were all very different from what we see nowadays.
And you did mention crypto a minute ago, and also what we need to discuss is blockchain, because there's so much excitement around that. And I know it's something that you're quite passionate about, especially around how it can help combat security concerns of digital payments. What excites you most about this technology?
Blockchain, again, I think like crypto, blockchain is something which, again, evokes mixed reactions. There are people who are, I think, genuinely excited about what it promises as a new technology. There are others who say it's yet another fad that's going to die a natural death, simply because it's not been industrialized and not been scaled in the manner that was expected to, let's say, 3-5 years ago. That said, I think, a lot of these new technologies, Neil, I think the important thing to acknowledge is that not all of them sort of industrialize to scale, and they don't mature overnight. And we need to give them a bit of time before we can be very judgmental about the success or otherwise of these technologies. Certainly, as far as blockchain technology is concerned, my personal view is that it will have a role to play. Whether it'll be the underlying infrastructure on which everything gets done is a moot point, and we're probably still some distance away from that. I'd say, when you look at recent developments and what is on the horizon going forward, I think the most exciting use case, or one of the most exciting use cases, is certainly payments and cross-border payments. Distributed in a shared network built on blockchain certainly has the potential to, enable much greater speed, vastly improve visibility of the transaction and where you are in that, in the payment cycle. Certainly increase efficiency, because that's one of the underlying promises of a blockchain network. Facilitate greater automation, and ultimately, drastically bring down the cost of payment transactions. And I think this is one area where we'll see a big change, because many other technologies, look at driving down cost only when you reach a certain scale. I think in blockchain, you've already got some inbuilt advantages there, and therefore I think we'll see low cost of payments fairly quickly. That said, when something is built on the principles of a permissioned blockchain, such a network will obviously require the participants to be explicitly admitted to whichever the network is, and to identify appropriate roles and permissions, because it has to be, it's going to be a network where roles and permissions and the role that each party will play has to be very clearly, outlined upfront. And this will only, ensure that identified participants can perform certain actions. So, who's participating, what that party is supposed to do, and when that party is supposed to do that within the blockchain. So I think that will go a long way in providing that clarity, that visibility, the transparency, the certainty towards completing of these transactions. So I think blockchain will go a long way in addressing the security and confidentiality concerns of enterprises in a business network. And I'm particularly keen to see how cross-border payments will scale leveraging blockchain.
And I think if we look back at our history, the success of any technology will be determined by the mainstream adoption of it, whether it be I think, by both enterprises and consumers, to be honest. But what do you think that secret is to improving digital adoption progress and continuing to build infrastructure for these cashless environments?
Yeah, that's a great point. And, ironically, we are talking and we're sort of recording this, Neil, at a time when hopefully the worst of COVID is behind us, but it still exists in our midst. So, it took a pandemic like this to hasten the pace of digital adoption across economies, across industries, across segments of society, and, in all manners of business and personal transactions that we've done in the last 2 years. So it's unfortunate that it took a, costly phenomenon like the pandemic to hasten that. But that said, I think it's opened the eyes of the world to what, improving digital adoption can do going forward. So I think specifically, building a robust acceptance infrastructure and facilitating digital inclusion. So, earlier in this conversation, we talked about the need to have an infrastructure where, inclusion of more and more people, inclusion of allowing the infrastructure to allow, the creation of a bedrock that is set up on a cashless economy, efficient banking systems, rich digital infrastructures, certainly rely on, much more reliable internet connectivity, robust digital payment interfaces, even as we create new payment rails. I think all of these will go a long way. Certainly the increasing smartphone penetration, the fact that, the smartphone today is probably the most important thing that you carry in your hand. And I often, as someone who's traveled to many parts of the world, I've often said that, the two most important things for me when I travel are the smartphone and my passport. And I'm never able to sort of judge which is the more important, because you lose your passport when you're overseas, it presents a certain set of problems, but you can go to the, your British High Commission and get another passport there. But you lose your phone, I mean, it's like resetting your entire life.
Yeah.
Everything about your business, your personal transaction, everything is there on your smartphone. So I think the smartphone penetration and all the associated, security infrastructures will certainly go a long way. I think we have to talk about financial inclusion here. Too often we look at this only from the point of view of a large majority like us who are, a privileged lot.
Yeah.
But we often ignore those who are living on what I call the margins, and the pain and sometimes the costly exclusion that they go through for many things which you and I take for granted. So I think for a cashless economy to take off, the primary precondition necessarily needs to be that there has to be the existence of a universal financial inclusion program. And while the program itself will take some time to be created, I think the first and a very good starting point will be the acknowledgement, whether it's the government, whether it's business enterprises, whether it's even individuals like you and I who've been fortunate to take many things for granted. The acknowledgement that financial inclusion can go a very long way in helping all of us as a community get better. I think this is certainly something that needs a lot more focus on. And if that happens, then digital adoption and indeed eventually, being cashless will be facilitated substantially. And last but not the least, I'd point to, cybersecurity and, no talk of digitization and everything else can be completed without, some reference to the fact that any form of digital infrastructure is indeed highly vulnerable to cyber attacks, whether it's cyber frauds, phishing, identity theft, and what have you. So, of late, there have been, cyber attacks that have become more sophisticated and organized, and they clearly pose present danger. And I have to confess that I think many of us as, lay people in the community, we're probably not even fully aware of the kind of dangers that some of these attacks could pose on us. So I think cybersecurity as an area of focus certainly needs to, receive the kind of attention, and it has been receiving attention, it must be said. So, whether it's defenses against attacks, whether it's data protection, addressing privacy concerns. I'd also point to possibly a robust surveillance to preemptive attacks, and a more, what I call an institutionalized, cybersecurity infrastructure and architecture. So I think all of these will go a very, very long way in creating the kind of economy that we want.
I completely agree with you there. And just to bring to life everything that we're talking about today, do you have any examples that will help a business or business leader understand the power of leveraging the latest innovations for this seamless digital authentication, deeper customer engagements, frictionless banking experiences, etc.? Because that's like the destination, isn't it? But it'd be great if you could share a few examples to bring that to life, so to help people understand how it might work in their world.
Sure. There are obviously many examples, and certainly the last 2 years we've seen, and I think one has been encouraged by even more examples, not necessarily all of the same type, but maybe I'd point to a couple of them. So one is, the largest and oldest mutual banks in the US, they offer banking, investments, insurance, everything under one roof. The bank realized that it needed a modern online and mobile banking platform, that would help keep up and eventually surpass their customer expectations of what, an ideal digital journey would be like. And we were fortunate to partner with that bank and implemented, our online banking and mobile banking platforms to lay the right foundation to help deliver a seamless and a consistent experience. I think from what the bank has told us after they've implemented that, the benefits, of course, have been multitude, but some of them would, be pointing towards, a much higher adoption, of over 60%, if I remember correctly, of active checking out customers who benefited from that migration. The second was the rapid adoption of the new personal loan application experiences that resulted in the digital becoming the primary channel for application volume, and for a significant driver being behind the increase in their personal loan portfolio. If I remember correctly, it was upwards of 125 or 130%. The other area, of course, has been something that has been oft talked about in the last 2 years of COVID, which is having a fully digital account opening process where you don't need to go and meet an agent or you don't need to visit the branch. Whether it's for new customers, whether it's for existing customers, having all of that done completely, remotely is something that is something that this bank did very, very quickly and easily once they implemented that. And similarly, I mean, while I talked about, account opening, I think also loan originations, sometimes loans and, any form of lending activity, from the point of view of the person taking the loan is seen to be a transaction that is very paper heavy, if you like, a lot of documentation to be given and so on. I think a lot of the more recent processes are, looking at loan origination being done completely on digital channels, so that you significantly outnumber, the branch channels and the volumes that come through branches. And I think more and more banks are certainly moving in that direction, as did this bank that I just referred to. I think one of the other examples, which was very different from the first example that I gave, was one of the United States' most well-known investment banking decisions. And there, investment banking businesses, and their decision to move into consumer banking after being in existence for over 125 years. So this bank chose us to be one of their partners to manage the complete, consumer loan servicing lifecycle. And the bank chose a fully cloud-based model, and we were fortunate to work with them on that from the very start. And this allowed the bank to achieve, sizable scale, as well as to provide, a lot more functionality and capability than what they had been traditionally used to doing. So I think it certainly increased the business confidence, a lot more, focus on the security for its customers. If I'm not wrong, they surpassed their business targets. Business targets they set out for the first 24 months. They surpassed that much, much earlier than that. And, in the first 2 years, I think they'd accumulated over 36 billion in deposits and probably 5 to 7 billion in consumer loans. So these are two slightly differing examples, but I think very representative of what's happening today as the world and certainly the banking industry moving towards becoming more digital.
And as someone that's working right in the heart of this space, you're a big part of the journey and where it's going. What excites you most about the future and the difference this technology will make?
Oh, there are many things. And, so I've got two sons who've recently joined the workforce. So my older son joined the workforce about 4 years ago, and my younger one is joining the workforce in the next couple of months. And they've heard me say this, multiple times, that they're joining at a time when everyone talks about more competition, but I often say that it's the most exciting phase. Certainly, I didn't see this kind of excitement, in the last 30 years of my career. So I think, there are lots of changes that are happening today, some of which we need to be wary about, no doubt. But I think there's a lot of excitement certainly at stake. And I think, given that we're recording this in the context of cashless transactions and what a cashless economy might look like, I think one of the things that I'm very interested in is this, it's exciting and, almost unbelievable that we are possibly bringing to an end a human innovation that's been in existence for, close to 5,000 years. And I'm, of course, talking about money. The fact that money might cash or, some form of, equivalent currency, this might soon be a matter of the past. That itself is, hugely exciting. I think the fact that the cashless economy is starting to already take shape, and as we continue to create, innovative ways of exchanging money without pulling out the wallets from our back pockets, cash might actually become a thing of the past. So I think this is certainly something that I'm very excited about. Of course, we've talked about the fact that there's still a lot that needs to get done. But I do believe that, this is certainly, given the fact that currency has been in existence in some manner or the other now for 5,000 years, I think the fact that we could be closer than ever before to seeing the end of currency notes and currency in the manner that you and I have understood that, I think that is hugely exciting. And it's exciting, I think, to be imagining a generation today that's being born in the near future where cash in physical form will seem incredulous. It seems unbelievable that in future people will even think of cash in its physical form. No different from our children trying to tell them what a phone in 20 years ago used to be, where you had to actually dial the number. They're simply not used to it. They can't even imagine what that device might look like. So I think the fact that we are close to being a cashless economy is itself very exciting. Even as it raises ethical questions, and it raises a whole host of other questions around financial inclusion and so on. Certainly, that's one thing that's very exciting for me, Neil.
And what about Finacle? What's next for you there, and where do you go from here as a company? What's your big focus right now? I
think we are fortunate to be very fortunate to be in the space we are at. And I mentioned to you at the start of this conversation that as a business, we are a business that's focused completely on organic growth. And the last financial year, we follow an April to March financial year. And the last financial year was the best year in Finacle's history. And mind you, when I say best year in Finacle's history, it was measured only in organic terms. So we didn't shore up our revenues by acquisitions and so on. So I think we believe we are in the right place. We believe our story is resonating very well with those segments of the market that we choose to play in. And there are many areas that we choose not to play where many of our other competitors might have solutions, but we are happy with that. We'd like to pick our battles, and we think we do well there. Obviously, our clients' success, goes a long way in inspiring us to do even better. And, in the last 1 year, Finacle was fortunate to have won over 20 industry awards. And I think that speaks volumes, not just for what Finacle is capable of, but equally about, the way the customers have deployed, leveraged, and ultimately, used that to make a difference to their end clients. I think the proof of the pudding is that it's not just about the bank deploying your solution, but ultimately how it makes a difference to their end customers. I think that's where, the real proof of the pudding is. And, we seem to be doing many right things there, going by the fact that purely in financial terms, we had an extremely successful year, our most successful year, as I said, and we seem to have won a very large number of awards. So I think, we are focused, in helping banks to, whether it's to engage with their customers, whether it's to help them innovate, whether it's to operate more efficiently, or indeed transform, given the kind of environment we are in today. So I think we do all we can to help them improve their customers' financial lives. And that is why we exist. And, we'll be very focused on continuing to do that, Neil.
Well, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. Now, I know you listen to the show as well, so this is the time where I'm going to ask you to leave everyone listening with a gift from your insights and experiences, and ask you to share a book that has maybe inspired you or important to you that we can add to our Amazon wish list for other listeners to check out. Is there a book that springs to mind that you'd leave us with today?
I'm actually going to tell you about two books, and I'll come to that in a minute.
Cool.
So I used to read very extensively in the past, but I have to say I went through a phase where podcasts rather than reading became my go-to pastime, both for relaxation and for self-education. And, I mentioned to you, your podcast is one of those that I've listened to. And I think, the fact that you can listen to a podcast, whether you're on the train, whether you're exercising in the gym, whether you're doing your chores at home, that's the great advantage of podcast. And I've really loved that. And, even a lot of books today come in audible format. So, it sort of helps you kill two birds with one stone, if you like. Given what I told you at the outset of this conversation about my interest in the ethics of AI and about the convergence between anthropology and the study of human beings and digital technologies, as you can probably imagine, Neil, much of my reading, certainly in recent times, has been around those two broad subjects. I also have a habit that some of your listeners might think is peculiar. I typically read 2 books at a time. I think it helps me in a couple of ways. It helps me, I think, compare and contrast, because the 2 books will never be one and the same, they're of different themes, different subject matters. So it allows me to sort of compare and contrast, because every book brings you something new. There's something that you learn from every book. And, they're often on differing subjects. So I very rarely read 2 books at the same time on the same subject. I'm reading 2 right now, which I've found both to be very compelling. The first is a book called Fake AI, which examines not just the dreamy and the bright side of AI that everyone talks about, but about why an avatar of AI that is both fake and deeply flawed, and why it exists in the world today. And what I liked about this book is that it takes a multidisciplinary perspective. And in some ways, I think it goes towards dispelling some of the hype that surrounds AI today. AI as a technology is, progressing very rapidly, but it's all, raising a lot of questions, and rightfully so. So, this book questions the injustices and the related insecurities that exist because of a very problematic and a questionable version of AI. Now, mind you, I'm not saying that every deployment of AI is only a questionable or problematic version. All I'm saying is that often we tend to overlook that in the midst of all the other hype that exists around AI. And I think this book, in a form, is a reality check around what AI can do. The other book is something which is very interesting, and it's a book called Metaphors We Live By. I think the 2 authors are George Lakoff and Mike Johnson, or maybe Mark Johnson. Sorry, I don't recollect the name. But the book's name is Metaphors We Live By. And as the name suggests, it helps us understand the role of metaphors. But not just that. I mean, all of us use metaphors very regularly in the way we speak. But also, I think what this book has done is that it's emphasized on how metaphors help us understand more about ourselves, how we think, how we act. And particularly when you look back on incidents that happen in your life and you have the benefit of hindsight, many times, metaphorically speaking, some of these things make more sense, whether it's something good that's happened to you or something that's not so good, and this is a book that was recommended to me by a friend of mine. It's not the kind of book I confess I might have normally picked up.
Yeah.
But having said that, I'm thoroughly enjoying it. I still have some pages to go, but it's a very different book. And certainly, as the name suggests, Metaverse We Live By is something that's as interesting to read as it is practical, because we all use metaverse in our life. So these are the two, Neil, that I'm presently reading.
Love that. I'll get both of those added to the Amazon wish list. Kudos to you for being able to read 2 books at one time, though. That's something that blows my mind completely. Maybe I'm just not very good at multitasking or having 2 things on the go at once. But
well, fortunately, you didn't ask me how long it takes me to read a book.
Brilliant. Well, I'll get those added to the wish list. And before I let you go, for anyone just wanting to explore the topic we've discussed today a little bit further, find out more information about Finacle, or even carry on that conversation with someone from your team, what's the best starting point for everything?
Sure. As far as Finacle is concerned, your listeners can write to us at finacle@infosys.com. That's FINACLE @Infosys, INFOSYS.com. In my personal capacity, I'm very active on LinkedIn. So I obviously post a lot of, I'm active there, both in terms of the role that I play at Finacle, but also in my personal capacity. And, there are probably a lot of Sanat Raos on LinkedIn. But if you were to search my name, then in my profile, I introduce myself as a digital anthropologist and an AI ethicist. So if you see those 2 words, you'll know that's me. And those of you who are listening to this podcast and who are interested in either of those 2 subjects, I'd love to connect with you on LinkedIn. So please do reach out. I'm also fairly active on Twitter, and my handle is @Sanat_Rao. So that's about it, Neil. That's how I can be contacted and how Finacle can be contacted.
Awesome. Well, I'll get those links added to the show notes so people can find you nice and easy. And so much I loved about our conversation today, especially exploring the pros and cons of this future cashless environment, and especially around creating ease and efficiency, but also being able to explore financial inclusion, understanding the costly exclusion from that space at the moment and tackling that head on. So much to talk about, but thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me today and bring that topic to life. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Neil. It was a fantastic experience talking to you, and I look forward to speaking again in future.
Read 2 books at the same time? What is this sorcery? But seriously, when listening to Sanat's reasoning there, I completely get it. So I might have to follow his lead on that one and report back to you all. So a big thank you to Sanat for coming on here today, sharing his thoughts on how to improve digital adoption progress and continue to build infrastructure for a cashless environment, but also being incredibly mindful about increasing financial inclusion and ensuring everyone comes along for that ride. Food for thought indeed, but you've heard from me today, you've heard from Sanat. You could be listening somewhere in the world and have a completely different viewpoint or different experiences. And one of the reasons I record this podcast every day is to get every voice on here. So whether you want to send me a quick audio message to techblogwriter@outlook.com or on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram @Neil C. Hughes that we can play on this podcast, or even just send me a quick old-fashioned text message. Do any of those things. And equally, there's an invite for you to come on here and join me on the podcast too. We'll keep this conversation going. And together, maybe we can all learn a thing or two and have a more broader perspective on everything of how technology is transforming our world. So keep those messages, questions, pictures to come on the show coming in. And I also invite you to join me again tomorrow, where we'll do it all again on a completely different topic. So big thank you for listening as always, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.